afternoon, everyone. It is 3 p.m. ET, and you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. Welcome, welcome, welcome to you all to our Crime Time at this special time at 3 p.m. because we have a terrific guest for you today, and we just couldn't wait to bring him to you. First, I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. My current one is Her Perfect Life, so casually displayed behind me. And the new one is called The House Guest, and that will come out next February. And as I always tell you, you'll be hearing about that when the time comes. But today we have the enormous pleasure of chatting with the amazing Adrian McKinty. I have to figure out which way to hold this so it shows up better. Whose new book is The Island, which is, Adrian, I stayed up way too late reading this. I kept saying to myself, go to sleep, go to sleep. And I just couldn't. Is this what you're hearing from everyone?
Yeah, a lot of people have complained to me that it's kept them up late at night or they've missed their stop on the subway. And as an author, that's exactly the sort of thing you want to hear. You don't want to hear it put me to sleep, or you don't want to hear I forgot about it and left it on the subway. You want to hear it kept me up, I missed my stop. That's music to my ears.
That's what I always say too. I know your wife is from around where I live as well in Massachusetts, and I always say I want you to miss your stop on the T because you're reading the book, and that has happened to me with books. It's marvelous when it does. Publishers Weekly starred review, you all said, of The Island. They said deliverance meets road warrior in this harrowing survival thriller. McKinty is a master of suspense. Deliverance meets road warrior is exactly what it is. And I think I saw Deliverance. When was that? In the 70s?
72, 73.
And I still think about how scary that movie was.
Oh, well, I was so excited to get those two tropes, Deliverance and Road Warrior, because those movies were huge to me as a kid. In fact, the whole idea of The Island was to take a 1970s style thriller from that era and update it to 2022. So whenever I saw those words in PW, Deliverance meets the Road Warrior, I couldn't have been more excited, especially since after I moved to Australia, the very first weekend we moved to Australia, we lived in Melbourne, and I took the kids on a road trip to see where they filmed Mad Max.
Okay, so wait, I want you to tell me about that. I want to hear about that because I bet this is a longer story. And I need to do the housekeeping,
sure,
telling people where they are and who they're listening to. But you just hold that in your mind, and you do too. Here is Pamela Fry Priest saying, "OMG, yes, it was so scary." Bozena is here today. That's great. And Nisa is here saying, "Hi, Hank and Adrian from South Carolina, eager to hear about this book." And Alexander is here today. Greetings from Norway. So you see an international crowd here for you. Adrian, if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, all of you, welcome, welcome, welcome. A Mighty Blaze, as you know, was started at the beginning of the pandemic, which is way too long ago, by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, just to keep us together and keep us chatting, like Kathy is saying right now. Welcome to all of you. And it's worked. We've had 2.5 years now of programming on A Mighty Blaze, several dozen volunteers keep us running. And you all, when I look over here, I'm looking at your comments. That's why I'm looking this way. Hey, Brenda. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Kathy. To bring us all together, as I said. And you are the people who keep us together and reading books like the fabulous, the fabulous Adrian McKinty's The Island. And I'm going to keep talking and tell you a little bit about Adrian. I warned you, Adrian, this was going to be some time.
Oh, yeah. You told me this was coming.
Yeah, yammer. But this is important. Adrian McKinty was born and grew up in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He studied politics and philosophy at Oxford University before moving to New York in the mid-1990s. His first novel, Dead I Well May Be, loosely based on his experiences as an illegal immigrant in the U.S., I'm reading this wrong, was published in 2003. In 2012, after moving to Australia with his wife and children, he began publication of the critically acclaimed Sean Duffy series. In 2019, after giving up writing, and there is more to a story there that I want you to tell later, Adrian had a global hit with his standalone novel, The Chain. You all, if you haven't read The Chain, don't go right now and get it, but after this is over, go get The Chain and The Island. Adrian's books have won the Edgar Award, the Ned Kelly Award 3 times, the Anthony Award, Barry Award, McCavity Award, and the Threakston Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year Award. His books have been translated into more than 40 languages, and lucky, lucky you, Crime Time listeners, we are giving away a copy of The Island today. So just leave a comment or a question or just general applause and adulation for Adrian in the comments, and you will be entered to win a copy of this book. The Wheel of Fun will draw. Oh no, the Wheel of Fun is not working today. Well, the glorious people in the back room of Crime Time will pick a winner at random, and we will award that at the end of the show. Here's Christina from Melrose, Massachusetts. That's wonderful. And Sherry says, I've read this and it is so good and intense. Indeed, it is. So Adrian, before I so rudely interrupted you with housekeeping, you were telling us about when you took the kids on a road trip to where they filmed Mad Max.
So yeah, exactly. One of the very first things I wanted to do was to go and see where they filmed Mad Max, which is just about an hour outside Melbourne, so anybody can really go there and see those desolate, empty roads in southern Victoria. And then a more interesting road trip is to see where they filmed The Road Warrior, which is about another 6 or 7 hours north. And then you go really out into the desert, and that's a lot more interesting, into this sort of semi-apocalyptic desert. And you can totally imagine The Road Warrior taking place up there. So I was always taking the family on these. We didn't know how long we were going to be in Australia, so I wanted to see as much of the country as possible. So we were always going on these road trips that at least I was enjoying. The kids.
So does it really look like that? Australia, the far away from civilization in Australia, that's not just a set.
Oh no, I mean, about 3 hours out of every city. And you're into some really interesting landscapes. I mean, just north of Melbourne and west of Sydney and west of Brisbane and east of Perth, you're into some fantastic sceneries and landscapes. And absolutely, I love driving through it. I mean, it's a long drive. I mean, you can drive to Alice Springs from Melbourne. I mean, it's a long drive, like 14, 15 hours. But you go through some incredible scenery. It's absolutely wonderful.
I bet it's sort of, I mean, I can imagine it's just sort of otherworldly. It makes you feel like you're living a different life.
If you grew up in the Northern Hemisphere, like us, or, I've never really experienced the desert before. Mm-hmm. And so to go through that desert with these incredible cliffs and, these monoliths, on the far distance that never seem to get closer, no matter how far you drive. And then I remember just the road signs that you would see. And I remember coming into Alice one time when the road sign said something like Darwin, which was the next town, 1,400 kilometers. And I thought,
okay,
that's fantastic. So if your car breaks down or you run out of gas, well, the next town is 1,000 miles away, which it was really kind of exciting and cool to be in that world.
Which is sort of how the very first line of The Island is, how far away
exactly.
we are out of civilization. So takes us perfectly segueing into what this book is about. How would you describe this book?
A vacation gone wrong story. Very, very badly wrong. And, just never leave your house. That's my advice to anybody. Never leave your house and with the kids, just stay home.
Well, I mean, people are complaining now about how, because of COVID, we don't get to take vacations. All you have to do, you all, is read this book and you'll be so happy that you're safe at home with your phone and food and all the conveniences. So basically, this is about a father who's a doctor who takes his family, his new wife, his young, new sort of, we think, ditzy little wife, and his two incredibly annoying teenage children.
Yep.
and they go to Australia where he is talking at a medical seminar, and the kids are demanding koalas.
Yeah, exactly.
What happens a little bit next?
Well, I'll flip it a little bit back and sort of tell you the real story behind it, if you'd like to hear.
No, that's perfect. Exactly.
So after I finished The Chain, I remember the very last book event I had was in March of 2020 in Oslo at the crime festival there. And while I was in Norway, my wife calls me up and said, Adrian, you've got to get home. The New York City public schools are closing and the whole country is going into lockdown. They're shutting the airports. And so I thought, oh my goodness, what's happening? And she said, pay attention to the news, Adrian. It's this thing called COVID-19. And so I flew back to the US and we got in, and the very next day they closed down the New York City public schools. And so my kids were home doing Zoom school, and my wife's a teacher, so she was doing Zoom school as well. And so everyone was around all the time, and Zoom wasn't really working that well. And the teachers would give the kids lots of homework because the school wouldn't work. So the kids were quite depressed and around all the time. And I was, and everything was locked down. And this was the period when I should have been writing the follow-up to The Chain, because I'd obviously signed a contract for 2 book deals. But months and months and months went by, and I had no desire to write anything because I was so exhausted dealing with the kids all day. When it came to nighttime, when I usually write, I would just go to bed. And so my editor would sometimes call me up, and she would say, how's the new book going? And of course, you always say the same thing to your editor. It's going great. It couldn't be better. It's fantastic. I have so many wonderful ideas. And then she would hang up happy. And then you can lie to your editor, but you can never lie to your agent. And so my agent would call me up and he would say, how's the new book going? And I go, oh, mate, I've got nothing. I'm so exhausted all day long. I don't feel like writing. I've got nothing. He says, well, you owe these guys a book. And I said, yeah, I know, but sorry, I don't have anything. So this went on for a long time, for at least 6 or 7 months, and writer's block. And then my agent, he stopped calling me up to hassle me. He started calling me up more as a therapist. And your
agent is great. Your agent, you all should know, is Adrian's agent is a genius.
Yeah, he's this great, wonderful guy called Shane Salerno, and so he would just call me up at like 11 o'clock at night, and we just talk about movies. And he knows I love 70s movies, and so he would just call me up and we talk about 70s movies. And I grew up in this era in the 80s in the UK, where they had these things called video nasties, they were called. And they were the movies that were so depraved and repulsive that they couldn't be released in the UK. X certificate was the worst certificate you could get. There was like U and PG and 15, and then X. And then there was the ones that could never be released because they would destroy the psyche of the population. So as a 12-year-old boy, those are the ones you wanted to see. You just wanted to see all these video nasties. So I would watch I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left and Texas Chainsaw and all these horrific 1970s.
Those were all on in the US, right?
But they were all video nasties in the UK. So I watched all those films, and they really got into my psyche as a kid. And then I watched all these other great 70s films like Deliverance. And so one night we're talking about all these 70s movies that we used to watch as kids. And I say to Shane, Shane, I had my own kind of Deliverance moment a couple of years ago. And he goes, oh, what was that? And I said, well, I'd taken the kids on this road trip once to southern Victoria. And we went to this island that I've called Dutch Island in the book. And it was immediately an odd situation because we got on the ferry and the guy driving the ferry was driving it with his foot while swigging a can of beer and talking about how these were shark-infested waters and very dangerous. And I thought, well, if I was driving a ferry over shark-infested waters, I'd have both my hands really firmly on the steering wheel.
Did you start hearing the soundtrack, the scary soundtrack?
Yeah, I mean, that was weird. And then when we landed, we saw a couple of guys with shotguns over their shoulders, which was really, really rare in Australia because they have very strict gun controls, and you never see long guns anywhere ever. You occasionally see a cop with a revolver, but you never ever see long guns. So that was weird. And we heard gunfire all over the island, and they were extirpating the local rabbit population, but we didn't know that at the time. We just see these guys with guns, and it's extremely hot, and there's gunfire, and it's February in Australia. I think it was the day before Valentine's Day, so it's 42 degrees Celsius, which is about 112 Fahrenheit. So it's incredibly hot, and we're driving around this island where there's really sort of nothing to see, and it's another road trip where I've taken the kids and the missus somewhere where there was no reason to go there in the first place. And we're driving around, and we come to this farm, and that's also when it kicks up a notch in terms of weirdness, because when we get there, they know all about us. They know we've driven there from Melbourne. They know who I am. They know my wife. They know all about our kids. And it turns out the guy on the ferry has walkie-talkied ahead and told them all about us. And then we learned that almost everyone on the island is related. They're all one large extended family. And then one of the people there makes a sort of inappropriate remark about one of my daughters that I don't hear, but my wife hears. And she says, Adrian, I think we should go. And I remember the guy on the ferry saying to me, he said, you've got to be back by 3 o'clock because I don't take anybody, or you got to be back at 3:30 because I don't take anybody back after then. And I looked at my watch and it was 10 past 3. And I thought, oh my God, everybody get in the car. And so everyone gets in the car, and I'm flooring it to get back to this ferry by 3:30 because I really don't want to spend the night sleeping in the car on this island when it's 42 degrees Celsius, 110, 115 Fahrenheit. And so I'm driving really fast, and with this long, what they call spinifex grass on either side of the road, which is this long, brittly, yellowy Australian grass, and you can't really see anything. Oh. And then suddenly, out of the grass, from the left-hand side of the road, a lady in a bicycle comes out right in front of us. And you see things really clearly when your adrenaline is pumping. And I see that she has a hearing aid connected to the back of her jean shorts. And I slam on the brakes and I honk the horn. And the hearing aid mustn't be connected, or the battery is failed or something like that, because she's here and we're here, and we brake. It just goes, the car brakes. And then she keeps on pedaling, completely oblivious. She's never heard the horn. She's never heard the braking. So she's pedaling right down the middle of the road, doesn't know that we're behind her at all. And I'm sitting behind the steering wheel, shaking. After any incident involving a car, what it's like, you're just shaking, really freaked out and frightened. And I'm sitting there behind the wheel, and to break the tension, I turn to my wife, who's sitting beside me, and I say, if we'd hit her, we wouldn't have got off this island alive. And she says to me perfectly seriously, I don't think we would have. Oh. And so cut to 2.5 years later, in the middle of lockdown, and I'm telling this anecdote to my agent, and he says to me, "Oh, McKinty, you're such an idiot." And I go, "Why?" And he says, "You did hit her. That's the next book." And then I thought about it, and I thought, "Oh, yes, we did hit her. That's the book." And so I started working that night, and the writer's block was gone completely. And over the next 4 or 5 months, the book just poured out of me, and that's how it came to be.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, first of all, let me just remind you all, I know you're all at home looking at the screen like, are you kidding me? What a story that is. That's an incredible, chilling story. And your wife saying, I don't think we would have,
Yeah.
is really the killer line, isn't it? Because
Yeah. I
she
mean,
was just the same way you were.
yeah, exactly. And in fact, we did a book reading in Mysterious Books last week in New York. And as I was telling the story, Leah was in the audience, my wife Leah, and she said, if anything, Adrian has undersold the creepiness and the weirdness, because she was a lot more freaked out than I was. And so I sort of, I guess when you're a man, you're not as freaked out. But she had overheard the remark about the girls, and she had picked up on the mood and the atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, they're making a day out of killing things.
Right, exactly.
Talk about predatory. Talk about the arrival of prey. Talk about invasion of territory, and we can. In a second. So I want to remind you all that you have just heard the origin story, the amazing origin story for The Island by Adrian McKinty, which we are giving away a copy of today. So make sure that you leave a comment like, glad you made it home, or something in the comments today, and we will pick a winner at the end of the show. But the thing is, when you translated this real adventure, which is intensely, disturbingly creepy, into the book. And if your wife says you undersold the creepiness, I don't know how that happened, because this is the scariest thing I've ever read. I mean, it's disturbing, and it's, it's kind of Wicker Man, and it's kind of
there's all those elements.
Kinds of, something's wrong and you don't really know what it is, but maybe you should go home real fast, but you can't really do that. And then you're telling yourself that everything is okay. One of the things that you bring to this book, though, that I think is so genius, and one of the many things, is that the father and the new mom and the two kids are at the beginning of the book, and I want to emphasize that at the beginning of the book, extremely unlikable. I mean, you just think, well, go die on this island then, because you're stupid and entitled and
exactly.
Talk about why you decided, and I know you made a clear decision to do this, to give them all that baggage.
Well, one of the things when I thought to myself, when my agent said to me, you idiot, you did hit her. Well, I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, I can't put me in the car. I'm too boring. I don't want to put my wife and my kids in there. I've got to make these characters interesting. And I thought, and also I wanted to give them all a journey that they had to go on. And so, all four characters actually in the car go on this emotional, physical journey, obviously, throughout the island, but they also have to go on this emotional arc. And so none of them are really fixed. And the family certainly isn't fixed at the beginning in any way. They all need to heal. There's a great. Do you ever see that Al Pacino movie, Any Given Sunday? And it's there's a great speech where Al Pacino. It's a failing football team. Al Pacino is the coach, and he gives this great speech near the end of the movie, and he says, we have to heal now before the big game. We have to fix ourselves first. And I was thinking about that while I was reading the book, and I thought, the family has to fix itself as a family before it can survive. And so in The Chain, it was quite easy, because it's this mother and her daughter's kidnapped, and so she'll do everything in this world to get her daughter back. There's really no moral dilemma or problem there, because any mother would do exactly the same thing as Rachel in The Chain. But I wanted Heather to have a lot more complicated decision to make.
She doesn't even want to be a mother.
No, she doesn't in any way. She hasn't bought into this motherhood thing. She doesn't want to do it. The kids don't like her. She doesn't like the kids. She pretends to, or tries to convince herself that she does, but she doesn't really. And the kids are openly hostile to her. The dad is this entitled knee doctor who's got this, I guess, basically what he considers to be a trophy wife, because she doesn't, even have her GED. You know, he doesn't consider her to be particularly bright. She's younger and she's pretty, and that's it as far as he's concerned. She's vacuous and uninteresting, and so this family, it just seems utterly broken. And I also like the fact that Heather in the book just seems this peripheral side character that everyone ignores, and she's been ignored her entire life, sort of, and underestimated certainly her entire life. And I love the fact that Heather goes on this incredible journey throughout the book, not just across the terrain of the island, but in her mind as well, where every challenge that she faces and every challenge that she overcomes, she becomes a little bit more confident and a little bit more sure of herself as the book goes on. And until by the end of the, don't want to give any spoilers, but by the end of the book, no one's underestimating her anymore.
Exactly. I mean, it's interesting because she's not making it up as she goes, as she's also drawing on what she realizes that she always knew, you know,
yes,
her
exactly.
own skills. Even she was underestimating herself.
Yes, I think that's the case with so many people. I mean, there's so many people, and they say, "Oh, I could like." Every time I go to a book event or whatever, people say, "Oh, I could never be a writer," and I say, "Why not?" And they said, "Oh, well, I mean, how do you do it?" And I said, "You just open up a blank piece of paper and you write down the things." They says, "Oh, but I don't have any ideas," and I always say, "You know, I think you'd be surprised if you were to sit down at a desk and open up a blank document on your computer or a blank piece of paper and start writing ideas. I think you would be surprised how many ideas you have." And people underestimate themselves.
Totally so. Totally so. I mean, if you ask yourself, what do I know that no one else knows? You know, then write that. That would, you know, and it's so interesting that the way that this story, I mean, what you draw on as besides your incredible imagination and your devious and manipulative storytelling skill, is this is also The Island. We're talking about The Island. I keep picking up this piece of paper. We're talking about The Island by Adrian McKinty. And Judy Morris, hey Judy, is saying, "I want to read this book. Sounds great." Yes, indeed, you do. There are also parts of this book that I wonder if you're just drawing on your dad parenting love. I mean, there are parts of this book that are so touching and tender, some moments that are memorably sweet.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I thought about, I mean, when I wrote The Chain was my first sort of real success. And everyone said to me, "Oh, you've got to write a sequel to The Chain." And there was no way I was ever going to write a sequel to that book. And I never will write a sequel to that book because I feel it has a very definite beginning, a very definite middle, and a very definite end. And I wouldn't want to expand on that universe. I feel the ending is the ending of the book is the ending of the book. But about halfway through writing The Island, I realized, oh, that's interesting, Adrian. What you're kind of writing is a thematic sequel to The Chain, because The Chain was about a youngish mother, a young woman who suddenly realizes this inner strength that she has, and she overcomes all these tremendous obstacles, takes complete command of this situation to protect her family. And then I found myself about halfway through this book, wow, it's the thematic sequel, because it's about this young woman in this horrible situation, this tense, terrible situation, who finds this inner strength somehow and protects her blended family and becomes the mother that these kids need in this time. And as about halfway through the book, I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, where does that come from? You know, sometimes you have these thoughts at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and then I sort of thought back to my own mother in Belfast in the 70s and 80s, and I was really lucky because obviously I was growing up during the Troubles, and it was a pretty terrible situation, you know, just with the bombings and the war and everything happening. But I was really fortunate, I was thinking at the time, because I had all these really strong role models in my family. I had my mom, who was incredibly strong, and I had my two older sisters who were around and surrogate mothers, and then I had my grandmother who lived down the street, and I had my Auntie Catherine who lived nearby, and I had these incredibly strong women. So anytime there would be like something really awful, like a bombing or some kind of atrocity, and as a little boy, you'd be terrified, and all these women would say, "Oh no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We'll keep you safe. Everything's going to be fine." And that role model of these just powerful, strong, amazing women. And if you've seen Ken Branagh's film Belfast?
No, I'm afraid I'll cry.
One of the things I thought was so interesting about that movie is that a lot of the men are over the water in England looking for work. I mean, because there's no jobs, there's this war taking place, and all the men. And it's the women in Belfast who keep the families and the societies together. These women under incredible pressure and who somehow have a smile on their face, and they're still getting the kids Christmas presents somehow, and they're still dressing them for school and just keeping it all together. And I think that was a really big inspiration for me for both of these books.
You can see that. You can see that there's a moment in The Island. Again, we're talking about The Island, you all. And Bozania is saying, who else but an Irishman could write about but strong women? And that is a great thing. There's a wonderful little scene in The Island where something happens, which I won't go into, but Heather does something kind and helpful and motherly. And she realizes that she's become part of this lineage of mothers, of saying,
yeah, exactly.
Every mother has.
There's a terrible bit that I really thought about in the book where Heather is coming into your skills, and there's a bit where the boy is yelling at her and screaming at her, and he decides to go his own way, and Heather has this half a page, it's just half a page long, thinking, if he goes and he goes off, I could totally survive this island a lot better without him being here. It would just, I could make it out of this. And really, he's not my child. I've only been married for a few months. It's not my responsibility. I've been given this responsibility. And I have her think about that for 2 or 3 beats in the story. And hopefully the reader is just going, Heather, oh my God, what are you going to do? And then I have her make what I consider to be the right decision. And she goes, no, it's my responsibility now, and I'm going to fulfill that responsibility. And my God, I'm going to protect these kids. And I really love that moment where just Heather, she's strong enough not to protect herself, but to protect all of them. And
one of the things that I do that is very powerful, and that is such a pivotal moment in the book, and you are rooting for her to do the right thing, because the reader is realizing sort of what's happening now. And the decision-making process, Sharon Carlson Person, who I love, is a big fan, is saying this book just keeps you on the edge of your seat, could not stop reading it. Absolutely. So now, I don't want to lose my train of thought about this. Yes, the decision that Heather makes is sort of in the middle of a series of decisions that everyone in the family makes along the way. And reading it, when you watch a movie and you're like, don't go into the basement, are you kidding me? Especially when the music starts. But every decision that the people make in this book is reasonable and logical based on where they are and what their situation is.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when I was writing the book, terrible things happen. Really, really terrible things happen, but it's all within the logic of the universe. At no point, hopefully, the reader is going, oh yeah, this happens because this happened and this happened. There's an internal logic there, which I don't think is broken. I think within the logic of the universe, it all makes complete sense. And you should understand everyone. And I think you should also understand the baddies as well. I mean, you understand the goodies, but hopefully you also understand where the baddies are coming from. They didn't ask for any of this, and hopefully you understand their motives and logic as well.
This brings me exactly to, this understanding of the baddies. And thank you for teeing this right up for me, is that, I don't want to go too thematically deep on this, but this actually, even though it's an unbelievable page turner and an incredible adventure, it's also a pretty interesting psychological study of privilege and have nots and civilization and consensual law and the power of money and what really matters. I mean, it's really a pretty deeply thought-provoking look at how society works.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really thought about, I mean, one of the things that always upset me a little bit about, I mean, I love Deliverance. I mean, I love James Dickey's novel, and I love his prose, and I love the John Berman movie. But one of the things that I was always a little bit upset about was they didn't really explore the class dimensions of the story in a way that they could have. I mean, these are all middle-class people from Atlanta, and they're building this dam that's going to flood this valley so they can have better air conditioning, one of them says in the book. And I thought that class dimension could have been explored a little bit more interestingly. So it's one of the things I definitely wanted to do in my book. I didn't want to make the villains just these one-dimensional monsters. I wanted them to have motives and a point of view, and I really wanted to explore. I still wanted you to be on the side of Heather and the family eventually, but I didn't want it to be quite as easy for everybody at the beginning.
No, and it totally makes sense. I'm glad you didn't say no, Hank. That's not what it's about. Not what it's about.
No, absolutely. No, really. That was really important to me. There's one or two, like early on, there's really important moral decision where I don't want to give too much away, but after the accident, they have to make a moral decision, and I feel they make the wrong decision, but it's completely understandable what they do just immediately after the accident, and it's interesting, and I go into their minds where they're thinking it through. What should we do here in this situation? And I always enjoy that stuff. I think that stuff is as fun for the reader to think about and to write about as the action as well. I mean, there's a couple of decisions that Rachel makes in The Chain that she just makes these really, really tough moral choices, terrible choices, and maybe the reader doesn't go along with her with those choices, but hopefully they understand it. And the same with Heather in this book. Maybe they don't go along with all these decisions that she makes, but hopefully they would understand, her moral reasoning.
I mean, that's one of the things that I thought was so propulsive. I still think about The Chain from time to time. And my husband and I had a huge conversation. He read it too, of course. My husband and I had a huge conversation about what would you do? What would you do? Because, usually there's a balance in justice or a balance in decision-making process. And there's some sort of right and wrong and moral, your ethical code. And at some point, though, that's going to be knocked over. And what are you going to do then? What you have, and that's what you do so brilliantly in The Chain, and again in The Island. And I could talk to you forever, but our time is running out. Let's see if we can take. Look, I have all these more questions for you.
Sure.
Let's see if we can take some questions from the audience before our time runs out. Do we have any questions from the audience? I'm seeing them. Judy Morris is asking Okay, Janice, what are you working on now? What is Adrian working on next?
Oh, I don't have to worry about that for about 2 or 3 more weeks yet. I'm finishing off the tour for the island and just finishing off the last of events. And then I'm going to take I think I'll probably take about a month off. So I'll probably take July off. And then August is when it starts to get scary again, because then I sort of have to start worrying about what the next project's going to be, and I have 1 or 2 little ideas in the back of my brain that have twinkled my fancy. So we'll see, but I don't have to worry about that.
It's interesting. It's interesting for you to allow yourself the idea and the release of saying, I am not going to worry about it for a month. I'm going to make an appointment with myself to just let it be. Just excuse me.
Exactly.
And I do. Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, this is your interview. You
I was
tell
just
me.
going to say, I really want to catch up on my reading because I've been so busy, and I love reading just inside the genre and outside the genre. So I can have a delicious 6 weeks where I don't write anything, but I just read constantly. So I'm actually looking forward to catching up on all my reading as well.
That really sounds like fun. I have this feeling every book that I think I'm never going to be able to think of another idea. I never, never, never will. I'm done. And then I realize, knock on wood, I always do. And it
Yeah.
comes when the time is right for it.
Yeah.
And so if you realize that and believe that and trust that, then you'll be fine. August the 2nd, you'll have your idea or whatever it is. We have time for one more question, I think. What's the daily writing process like, says Scott. Welcome, Scott.
Well, yeah, thank you, Scott. Well, when I'm in writing mode, basically, I won't start. Funnily enough, I've got into this new thing where I'll read during the day, or I'll hang out with the family, and then basically everyone is asleep by about 11 p.m. and the house is quiet, and the cats are quiet, and everything is quiet in the house. And actually, we live in a fairly quiet street in New York, and the street gets very quiet as well. And that's when usually I'll start. And I'll start about 11 p.m. and I'll work until about 2 or half 2 in the morning. And I quite enjoy that. Now, this is a lockdown thing that started for me. I used to write mornings in cafes, but now I like to write at night. And just when the whole world is asleep, you're sitting there and working. And I think you can tell, maybe you can't, but I think you can tell books that are written after midnight. There's just something about them. There's some little edge or something in the prose there that you can tell, oh yeah, this was written at 1:30 in the morning. And my last couple of books definitely were.
Books that are written after midnight. That is really something. We could both do research about books that are written after midnight. I write a lot after midnight. I think it's because of having worked for television for so many years, and I have to be on the 11 o'clock news, and my story has to be ready for the 11 o'clock news, and my adrenaline, my brain is really working at that time. So that's really, really interesting. Oh my golly, we are totally out of time. I'm just going to look really. Bozane is saying, what a lovely interview. Thank you. Shannon saying, great interview. This is for you. Adrian, that's very nice. Pamela says, this interview has been amazing. And it has for me too. You all, we have been talking about The Island by Adrian McKinty with a fantastic review in the New York Times Sunday Book Review. Sarah Lyle called it like insane and propulsive or some fabulous thing like that. Let me know if you want another copy of this, Adrian. And thank you for being here today. Congratulations on your mad success with this.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure indeed. So let me say to all of you who are in the audience, come back in 17, this is me doing math, 17 minutes, because we have another author for you today on this special double booked edition of Crime Time. Crime Time is the only place where it's good to be double booked, right? And today we have Sulari Gentle, who, and this is so meta, is in Australia. Just like The Island in Australia. We didn't even plan this, but it's a theme. Sulari Gentle will be here in about 15 minutes. So grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever you like and come back in 15 minutes for Sulari Gentle. Let's pick a winner of The Island by Adrian McKinty. And and the winner is Kate Victory Hannison. Kate Hannison, so nice that you came today. So you will contact me and we will get you a copy of The Island. The rest of you, Adrian can't say this, but I can say this, run, right out and get your own copy from an independent bookstore or from your library. You might want to clear your calendars. Absolutely. Adrian, thank you again. And you all, I will see you in 15 minutes. And remember, it's always safe inside a book. See you soon.